Some say that they want a game to be realistic, but what they're actually talking about is they want to feel immersed. And this is one thing that's really annoyed me for a long time. That people are like, oh, why is this not realistic? Or it's not got, it doesn't look like a real world and this, that and the other. I'm like,
it's not realistic.
It's not realism that you're after.
It's immersion.
If you went and played an actual realistic shooter, you would be fucking bored out of your mind. You would be sat there, this is a massive exaggeration, but you'd be sat there for 2 hours waiting behind a sandbag for them to fire one bullet at you, and then they'd fire one, and you'd be like, holy shit, they fired one bullet! Fire like 50,000 clips back! And then like you'd wait for another day, and then you get the
Real
gist.
combat doesn't work like that. I mean, I know maybe World War II did. That's why World War II shooters were popular. They work, etc. But nowadays, it's not as simple as that. And this is kind of, I think a lot of people that say they want realism are very casual gamers, because, for example, if you've played America's Army, that tries to be a realistic shooter. It's the most boring shooter you'll ever play, and it's not even realistic. If you want true realism, you should not be allowed to respawn, right? I mean, if you want to make a game that's truly realistic, you can't make it. And this is when people go and complain about, I don't know, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. They say it's not realistic, and I'm like, well, are you here for the game? Are you a gamer or a soldier? It's like, I think the problem is they just see kind of real world weapons and a game that tries to portray you as, oh, Lieutenant Super Sergeant, Corporal Private Super Master Sergeant in the army of, I don't know, 3rd Regiment, this, that, the other, with like realistic graphics. And people, like casual gamers, would look at it and think, oh, look, I can simulate being an army. They see it as a simulator, when actually it's not. It's a video game. There are design decisions that have gone into it.
It's deliberately made for a fun experience. It's not made for you to go and think, oh, okay, I've got this gun, and it's got this amount of recoil, and at this distance, I need to fire it like this, and I can't do it in this amount of burst, because it's just not going to fire right, so I'm going to hit him here. No, you don't need to do any of that. The whole point is it's a game. It's made to be fun, impulse fun, not something that you go and calculate, which you probably have to do on a real battlefield. And I've spoke to someone who was in the army, and he said that he played Call of Duty beforehand, thought the army was going to be like that, total idiot that he was, and then went into the army, came back, played Call of Duty and said, oh, being in the army's made me better. And I'm like, no, you've just, when you've had the actual time, you've spent your time playing Call of Duty. You haven't actually learned anything from the army.
Yeah.
He's like, no, I have, because I've learned how to control recoil. Hang on a minute.
Dude,
your control is based on whether you can move the stick in the correct pattern to get what you want on screen, not your knowledge of going, oh yes, when I fire an M249 saw, I can only fire this amount of bullets in real life before my arms fly off, which could actually happen if you're.
And the recoil pattern in games which actually have recoil, which are Counter-Strike, not Call of Duty,
are totally different. For gameplay design.
They are programmed. They have a very predictable. In fact, on Steam, I saw a guide that detailed every single weapon's recoil pattern and the correct compensation for it. You can't do that in real life. It's not about what people want. Is not realism. What they want is they want the game to be kind of something that they can get lost in, something that's kind of tangible, something that's intrusive. For example, when Battlefield, right, they try and make the bullet physics real. They don't have hit scan. They make the guns have recoil. They have these complex kind of mechanics. It's just so that it feels more immersive. It feels more advanced. It doesn't, because if you've got a game where it's literally block movements and it's very basic gameplay, you just think, well, this isn't really believable. You just think, well, this is amateur. They could go further. They could add more depth. And what they want is the depth. They don't want... And this depth, how do you add it? Well, the natural progression from making a very simple game to making a more advanced game is to add the depth through something that's realistic. If you're making a shooter, how do you add depth to it? Well, you try and make it more like how it would be in real life, because in real life it's like infinitely complex. In a game it's more simplified. So how do you make it more advanced? By making it a bit more realistic, or attempting to, but not necessarily in order to compromise on the gameplay. You wouldn't make it realistic, or if you die you can't respawn ever, and that's like your 40 quid that you paid for the game gone. So the best example of an immersive game is the Far Cry franchise. I don't think I've been immersed in many other games compared to these, like 1, 2, 3, even Blood Dragon. I think they are the most immersive games I've ever played. Not because necessarily they're realistic, but because the game world, the environment, the sound, the visuals, they make me feel like, and the kind of the difficulty of it, it's so perfectly designed so that I feel like I'm in that game world. The game world doesn't seem limited. I feel like I'm actually there. Like, I'm the guy on the screen with the gun. And it doesn't have to be about realism. Because the first Far Cry game, if you play it on the realistic difficulty, like, you die in a realistic number of shots, etc. But the AI is not particularly... I mean, the AI is good, but it's not a realistic game. But it's a game that you can just kind of watch. You can play it and just think, this is like a realistic Rambo in a way. You attempted to say it's realistic because you're so immersed in it and you feel like you're there. So you just think, oh, I am actually having this experience there and then. So you attempt to call it realism, but actually you know fine well it's not realistic. You're so into it that you feel like you're there. That's the thing, and this carries on with Far Cry 2. Far Cry 2, what they did is they made this open world game. You have like malaria, you've got this, and the sound in Far Cry 2 is what made it. I don't think I've ever come across a game that's kind of been so... It just really got it right in terms of the game world. I don't think many other people felt about it this way. They just criticised the game for repetitive missions and stuff.
Basically, if you want to go and actually live the game world while you're actually in it, forget about the missions, forget about what you actually do in a way.
Yeah. It's about...
And you actually, in the environment, just randomly roaming around.
Yeah.
You'll find that there'll be the creatures there. You'll find that the vehicles will all burn up and get trashed.
Yeah, the fire physics, the people coming after you randomly, you just having a random malaria attack.
The recoil's close to real. I'll say close to real because it's not realistic as such.
Yeah, but it's got recoil. The health system is really good. I mean, like the perfect difficulty for like Far Cry 2, if you want like what I would say is like the most immersive, is kind of the second to hardest one. That one's really immersive. Just the game world is designed in such a way that is so convincing that you can get lost in it.
Going back to what Cena said on sound, the thing is that when you play most games, I swear this is the case, but I'll have to double check, that Far Cry is in 5.1. It's 5.1 surround, and you will get full 5.1. Right? There will be full surround sound recording throughout any part of the game all the time. So you feel like it is all around you. Whereas when you go and play most games, I swear, even if they say they're in 5.1, they're in stereo. And this seems to be one of the things that I've heard. I'll put headphones on, and when you're playing Far Cry 2, you will actually feel like it's not stereo, even though your headphones can't possibly do any more than stereo. Whereas when you go and play something like
any other
Batman, right?
Yeah.
Batman is a good example. Sounds very, very good. The recordings are very high quality, but it's never anything more than monos to stereo. It doesn't give you that I am in the world kind of environment, just for sound.
Sound is very, very important in a lot of these games, and it's not very well utilised in some cases. But more than that, it's about the combination of the visuals, the gameplay, the game world, and the sound. And Remember Me also gets this as well. Like, it's okay, maybe it's not realistic gameplay, maybe it's not the best sound or whatever, but the game world is kind of, the levels are designed, the attention to detail is there, so that it is so convincing the way it's portrayed, through the way the environment is portrayed. I think that's got a really big part to it. So what I've been talking about is more the gameplay side. I felt immersed in Far Cry because I was in control all the time, and I felt at one with the controller. The mechanics, the controls, the gameplay, they all contributed to the immersive experience. But you can be immersed but have very little kind of direct input in the game. And it's in the same way that you can be immersed in, say, a movie, right? Even though you're not in direct control of it, you're involved in it.
The games that come to mind in this sense, first are LA Noire and San Andreas. And the reasons for that are, LA Noire's soundtrack is absolutely phenomenal. If you go to any part of the game, they will it will be so well written that you feel like you're in that environment. No matter what it is, if you go down the street in, it's say the 1940s, they will have 1940s jazz, and it's written specifically for the game. It's not just sounds that, oh yes, let's just get a 1940s song and play it. They've written a new jazz soundtrack, and it's really well done. They've managed to get the entire thing to fit the decade and just literally fit to every single environment. They managed to do this as well. The fact that I have a thing with facials in games, because I find that I play a lot of story-driven games where faces and characters are big. So I looked at LA Noire and thought, okay, this new technology is all nice. They've done facial capture and so on and so forth. But when you watch their lip movement and their eye movement and their cheek muscles moving and so on, the actual face doesn't look impressive itself as such. They're good, but they're not wow. But then when you look at their actual facial movements, you kind of totally lose the fact that the face itself isn't anything special, because you look at it and you're like, I'm convinced this is a real face. I am so convinced this is real. You look at someone like Greg Grunberg, who played Cop in Heroes, I forget his character name, but he just looks himself. His movements are like he is in Heroes, and it's amazing when you look at him and think, God, that's convincing. And you can tell when they're lying, when they're not lying. And the fact that some games, I will look at the story and they'll be trying to do an emotional cry bit, and I'll be like, no, just no, well, you've lost me.
Well, that's where realism comes in, really, isn't it?
And that's where, like, LA Noire for me, yes, okay, it's a one-off game. You can't always have that kind of technology, but LA Noire just had it right. The reason I mentioned San Andreas is the fact that you can't be immersed in the gameplay, because the gameplay is just weird and cartoonish and whatever. However, you find yourself shouting at Big Smoke, or find yourself like, Ryder, you such a dick! And there's not many games where you actually talk to the telly. It's really quite strange, but your mind plays tricks on you. You'll get these kind of things where your mind just thinks, oh, this is actually real, this is actually happening. I am actually about to shoot Ryder in the head. And, like, you get that kind of sense from games of this kind of quality and caliber.
It's games with kind of a big scale where, like, San Andreas is this huge world, and it's big worlds. I think that's why a lot of people would say they like RPGs. I mean, if you look at, say, GTA Vice City, it's not a big game world. It's quite a small map. But one of the reasons it's immersive is because it captures the 80s theme so right. The music is so right as well. It just... Some games just get it. It's about making it convincing. Not necessarily realistic. Vice City's not realistic. But it's kind of... It's on the right track of being that It's capturing the theme. It's getting the theme right.
The other two games that I would mention on this kind of the same thing are Heavy Rain and Max Payne 3. And even though I haven't played Max Payne 3, I have watched other people play it. And the way that they managed to portray the character and the different moods that he does and how they managed to get him to do... when you watch how he slumps his body language... the way that he's grumpy, because he's grumpy all the time, is fantastic, because they managed to get so many different kinds of grumpy. I know I'm being extremely picky, but sometimes it makes the difference. When you're having a game that is all drab and quite dull in terms of how the character feels, you can have just that one dull down boring emotion, but then you kind of eventually, after a couple of hours, you find yourself going, well, he's just depressed. Whereas if you can have he's depressed, he's sad, he's hating someone, he's got this, that and the other, you find that you connect a lot more with the character rather than just he's just one of those normal gung-ho macho kind of stereotypes. And if you go back to Heavy Rain, you lose yourself in the character Ethan Mars, because he manages to put so much emotion into what his actual portrayal of the character, the actor, that you feel if you were the parent of the kids, you would do the same. You can see his emotions, you can see his motivation, everything in that world is exactly how you would imagine that character to be, and exactly how you imagine him to react and so on. It's not like they don't cut anything out. The game doesn't pretend to do anything that it shouldn't do. And that, ultimately, when you actually go and play the game, you just don't ever want to move, because you're like, if I move, he's going to die! Which sounds strange, but when you lose yourself so much, you almost forget what world you're in. You just kind of lose yourself in the game world, and the game becomes your alternate reality for a couple of hours.
And surely that's the definition of immersion, right? So we've given you the two perspectives on immersion. It doesn't have to be realistic, but realism helps in some cases. For example, facial detail, obviously if you're doing that, you'd want it to be realistic. But gameplay doesn't have to be realistic. It has to be immersive. It has to fit the theme that it's going for. You have to play the game and not ever think, oh, okay, I can't do that. Like, for example, let's say you were playing Far Cry 3 and there was an enemy there and you thought, oh, if I was there in real life, or it's not actually real life, but let's say you just think, oh, I'm going to jump on him and kill him with a dagger, right? You've got to be able to do that without actually thinking about it. Immersion has to be intuitive when it comes to gameplay. You can't just think, oh, here, let me get out the rule book or the mechanics of the game and think, oh yes, this is what I can do, this is what I can't do. You've just got to be at one with the game. And immersion doesn't have to come from gameplay, it can come from story and characters too.